Warning, this video will most certainly spoil the events of Metal Gear, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, and most definitely Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. I shall also issue a warning for the entire rest of the franchise, including Snake Eater, Guns of the Patriots, and the Phantom Pain, etc. Also, if you've not seen them, it's recommended that you watch my reviews of Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2, and especially Metal Gear Solid for the utmost of context. With that said, I hope you enjoy the review of Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. After the huge hit that was Metal Gear Solid, Konami and Kojima had finally turned the Metal Gear series into a household name, and so with the release of the PS2 in the year 2000, it was only natural to expect a sequel, and in 2001, fans would deliver the long-awaited Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. With this being such a big game, I figured it was only natural to bring along a friend. Introduce yourself, good sir.
Hello everyone, Alec, Alger the SideQuest Gamer here, and I will be joining Jay this time not as a 5-minute rant like last time, but for the entirety of this review because I believe that Metal Gear Solid 2 is an amazing game. And even though it has its fans out there are still detractors of the game who consider it to be one of the weaker Metal Gear games, so hopefully Jay and I can at least give these people an understanding of why people like us enjoy it as much as we do.
With that said, why don't you kick off this in-depth review with a brief summary of the development history of Metal Gear Solid 2.
Alright, I know this is so you don't have to do it yourself, but I'll pick up the slack and put on my historian glasses.
Well, someone has to do it, right?
To say that this game has an extensive development history would be the understatement of the 6th generation of console gaming.
As well as being one of the most highly anticipated games of all time.
Development began as a design document Hideo Kojima wrote in 1999 for plans for the second game, and it contained potential new features and game mechanics, mainly focusing on such aspects he wanted to incorporate into the stealth, like the need to hide enemy bodies, improve field of vision for the enemies, the ability to see the shadows of others, basically a desire to design the enemies as realistically as possible. Instead of acting individually like the previous 3 games, they would behave like an actual military squad. The document also focused on another aspect, that being the overall theme of the game, which this game being Metal Gear Solid 2 is definitely going to have many themes, but these themes all have something in common, that being digitization. From digital simulations to digitization of the military, and even how digitization affects the individual in today's society. Due to the first game being a massive hit on the original PlayStation, the sequel to this massive hit had a development budget of around $10 million. $10 million going to a sequel on a brand new console with exciting new capabilities a PlayStation 1 could only dream of. With this budget, Kojima wanted the game to show off the hardware, mainly with detailed environments and even little things like facial expressions. I mean, I love Metal Gear Solid 1, but facial expressions were something the character models lacked.
Despite the game on the PS2 running at a 480i resolution and a 4:3 aspect ratio, the original game still looked gorgeous, although more details on the graphics coming later. So just so you know, the majority of this video will be based on the HD remaster of Sons of Liberty via the HD collection, which contains this, the first 2 Metal Gear games, Snake Eater and Peace Walker. FYI, that's how I'll be looking at those games as well.
Anyways, even in development, the controversial decision that fans weren't aware of, sparking an outrage still somewhat existent to this day, Kojima wanted a new protagonist to be the star of the game. There were a few reasons for this change. 1. It wouldn't make much sense giving tutorials to a veteran warrior who has accomplished not 1, not 2, but 3 stealth missions previously. In fact, that'd be outright condescending to a warrior like Solid Snake. 2. Kojima and company had an idea of, what if the player witnessed Solid Snake being Solid Snake, as in having Solid Snake be in the eyes of another player. And 3. Apparently over at the development studio during production of the original Metal Gear Solid, female debuggers apparently didn't like Solid Snake being a rugged old man, so this new protagonist would appeal to the female demographic. Other things worth mentioning was how this game's plot was originally going to involve nuclear weapon inspections at Iraq and Iran, but with the rising tension in the Middle East around that time, there would have to be some rewrites. There were of course characters that were written in concept to reference novel City of Glass, but then aspects of those proposed characters were absorbed into the characters we know in the game. There were even changes made to the ending, which I won't get into for spoilers' sake, but the changes were made in respect to America after the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center.
As established earlier, it can't be understated just how much this game was anticipated in the 3 years it took to come out. I'm going to say that is crucial information to understand how and why fans reacted to Sons of Liberty the way they did for a whole 10 years before minds slowly started changing in 2011 with the release of the Metal Gear Solid HD collection. Since by that point we had a decade of retcon-filled prequels and sequels that I guess retroactively made Sons of Liberty a better product, with many of its themes and elements making more sense in 2011 than they did in 2001. That's besides the point though. What is the point is that all throughout 2000 and 2001, fans were excited to see the second, but really fourth chapter in the Solid Snake saga. Metal Gear Solid had a huge cliffhanger at the end, with there really being a third clone of Big Boss, who just so happened to be the President of the United States, George Sears. There was even a VHS tape sold with the trailer, and the Hideo Kojima game Zone of the Enders contained a demo for Metal Gear Solid 2. So upon release on November 12, 2001, alongside so many other classic games that kicked off the PS2's successful career, such as Jak and Daxter The Precursor Legacy and Final Fantasy X, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty received near-perfect scores across the board, with almost 7 million copies sold on the standard edition alone, not counting the Substance version, which was an enhanced version of MGS2 containing extra features that we'll discuss later in the video. Well, with the exception of the skating minigame, but feck it wasn't on the HD version, which is pretty much MGS2 Substance in all other aspects.
But despite the high scores from professional critics, the players from what I've heard on YouTube when it came to people who witnessed its release, they all had similar reactions to the new character. You see, the Tanker chapter was all we knew from the advertising. Everyone thought they'd be playing as Snake because that's what the box art told us. That's what the commercials told us. Heck, that's what even the back of the box told us. I know it's foolish to have expectations before delving into something like a story-rich game, but can you honestly blame people for having such expectations? Everyone played the Tanker chapter as Solid Snake, learning the general mechanics of the game, and after a cutscene we won't get into until later, they're introduced to this new character, so they thought, alright, they play as a character, but until a certain point, it sinks in that they'll be playing as this less cool character for the rest of the game, and not as Solid Snake. Jay and I don't hold these reservations against the game, nor say it detracts from the overall quality of the game, but we didn't expose ourselves to the marketing before its release, as I was just making crayon drawings at the time, and Jay wasn't even housebroken.
Wait, what the hell?
We didn't even play this game until the HD re-release was well out into our late teens.
With that firmly established, this will be a top-to-bottom analysis of Metal Gear Solid 2 without these biases in mind, as we tell you why we both believe it to be the superior game to the original Metal Gear Solid. With all that out of the way, let's start with the story. Metal Gear Solid 2 begins in the year 2007, so if you're keeping track at home, that places this event 12 years after the Outer Heaven Uprising, 8 years after the Zanzibar land disturbance, and 2 years after the Shadow Moses incident. With that said, the intro cutscene might just be one of my favorite moments in video game history. We get about 2 minutes of Snake being hidden from the camera, followed by the cool action scene where Snake uses the stealth camouflage to run and jump off the bridge onto the tanker, where we finally get the grand reveal of seeing Snake in full detail. Since this part still wows me every time, I can only imagine how players in 2001 felt when finally seeing Snake in a detailed model.
Oh, I agree, but coming into this game right after playing the first Metal Gear Solid, I was paying more attention to how Snake was wearing Otacon's stealth camo, which was given to him in the bad ending of the first game. You know, the one where you give up like a pussy, resulting in Meryl's death? This is further supported by how Snake never even talks to Colonel Campbell, and Meryl's not in the game at all, nor is she even mentioned unless there's some optional codec call that I missed.
Anyway, Snake takes a call from not Campbell like in Metal Gear 2 and Metal Gear Solid, but instead Otacon, since we're then told about how Snake and Otacon have formed an NGO known as Philanthropy, where they take on numerous Metal Gear models around the globe, since after Shadow Moses, Ocelot had taken Rex's test data while Liquid was battling Snake and left the facility, reporting to the president at the time, George Sears, alerting him of the events and selling the technical specs of Metal Gear Rex in the black market.
Because of this leak of information, now every country is making their own knockoff Metal Gear. Even I have my own Metal Gear. Don't tell Exo Paradigm Gamer I'm planning on using it against First Cast. Anyways, the Marines are secretly hauling a new Metal Gear that's going to take them all out. Known as Metal Gear Ray, Snake's mission is to prove the Marines are responsible for having this monstrosity at their disposal.
Snake's pretty skeptical of how unsecure the tanker is, but Otacon attempts to calm his nerves, however, all hell breaks loose from there. We see Ocelot a few minutes earlier in a helicopter. However, Russian soldiers have arrived and are killing Marines left and right, so now it's a race to who can get to Metal Gear first. Thus beginning the game, and right off the bat I must say the Tanker episode gameplay-wise is also one of my favorite intros in gaming, since it's first meant to be seen as a tech demo for the PS2, and the parts outside in the rain look absolutely fantastic, with the effects used to make the rain seem to be individually hitting Snake's suit looking great as well.
Oh, I agree. For a 2001 game, the graphics are amazing, with the soldiers having camouflage that actually looks like fabric, and the concrete of the tanker looks pretty realistic, but the lighting and shadow effects are to this day really impressive as it adds the overall atmosphere of this rainy, chaotic suicide mission. This succeeds in immersing the player as well as introducing the player to many new mechanics that will be discussed much later in the review.
Snake progresses further into the tanker where he meets Olga Gurlukovich, who he gets in a brief gun battle with, although he merely knocks her out since he was using sleep darts. However, Snake's photo is then taken by a strange-looking device, which won't add much to the story right now, but keep it in your mind. Otacon then informs Snake that he lied about how they got the information, evidently since he got an anonymous tip from someone called EE, who reminded Otacon of his sister, Emma Emmerich. But then they found out the identity of the Russian leader, a man named Sergei Gurlukovich, who's one of Ocelot's allies. I thought this character came out of nowhere, but when I first played the Twin Snakes after having played all the other games, I was excited to see that his character was set up all the way back in Metal Gear Solid 1 and was the one who gave Liquid the high and D, and was meant to partner up with the Rogue Foxhound group if Rex was successful in its test launch.
So Snake travels deeper into the tanker, getting into a contained fight against Gurlukovich's men, and successfully sneaks into the assembly room where a Marine is giving a speech about the potential of Metal Gear Ray. Snake takes 4 separate photos of each section of the machine, uploads them to Otacon, but then...
Surprise, motherfucker!
Gurlukovich and Ocelot reveal themselves to the Marines, with Gurlukovich holding a gun to the lead Marine's head, hence why the other Marines don't retaliate. Gurlukovich mentions his disdain towards Americans after they bought out his homeland, but another plot twist. Ocelot has no intentions of going with the Ruskies' plans of selling it, and instead says he's taking it back before doing the usual cowboy slow-motion gun spinning, and he shoots Gurlukovich, revealing his true allegiance to the Patriots. Who are they? Well, that's to be revealed. We see how Ocelot has a fully functional right hand that was previously sliced off by Grey Fox in the previous game. Ocelot apparently had the deceased Liquid Snake's arm attached to him, but after he detonates the bomb set on the tanker to distract the Marines, he heads for Metal Gear Ray, and then he has a cognitive dissonance as Revolver Ocelot and the spirit of Liquid Snake linked to his arm are fighting for control of Ocelot's body.
But I live on through this arm!
From there, Ocelot takes control of Metal Gear Ray and escapes, attempting to kill Solid Snake alongside the destroyed tanker. But then the game fades to black, thus ending the tanker episode, leaving the player uncertain in regards to the fate of Snake. The game then reopens 2 years later with Campbell talking to someone who sounds like Snake, but is a bit off and has a bit of blonde hair under that mask. However, the carpet's pulled out from under us as we find out that we're absolutely not playing as Solid Snake, but a new character by the name of Jack, but is given the codename of Raiden for his mission. Since he's a member of Foxhound and they've been put on the task of stopping the Sons of Liberty, aka Dead Cell, consisting of Fat Man, Vamp, Fortune, and their mysterious leader going by the name Solid Snake. However, Campbell is quick to assure us that Snake died on the tanker 2 years prior. Also working with Dead Cell is Revolver Ocelot and Olga Gurlukovich and her soldiers that now work under whoever is the leader of the group. Dead Cell is demanding a $30 billion ransom, and if not met within 24 hours, then they'll detonate bombs in their base of operations, the Big Shell, which is an offshore cleanup facility meant to straighten out the mess that the destroyed tanker made. As if things couldn't get any worse, they've also taken the current president of the United States, James Johnson, hostage, using his life as another threat to get the money.
In comparison to Metal Gear 2 and Metal Gear Solid 1, and hell, even Metal Gear 1, the radio cast in MGS2 is noticeably smaller since we have Campbell performing the same function as the previous 2 games, and new character Rosemary, with no last name given. She is Raiden's girlfriend in real life, and the game will waste no time and make sure you remember that detail. However, she also is the one who saves your game, so she is helpful in that regard. Kind of like Mei Ling, except instead of insightful ancient philosophy, it's pretty much like a soap opera involving the main character.
After that's when it becomes apparent that you aren't just not playing as Snake, but the exact opposite of Snake. Evidently, Raiden was entirely trained by playing that awful game Metal Gear Solid VR missions. And no, I'm not making that up.
Any field experience?
No, not really.
So this is your first.
I've had extensive training, the kind that's indistinguishable from the real thing.
Like what?
Sneaking mission 60. Weapons 80. Advanced,
VR, huh?
but realistic in every way.
A virtual grunt of the digital age, that's just great.
Making this mission at the Big Shell his first bit of field experience. In comparison to Solid Snake, who saved the world from a nuclear disaster 3 times over, trained under the greatest soldier of the 20th century, Big Boss himself, with live exercises. And he had a flirtatious personality.
So there's something you like about me, huh?
Yeah, you've got a great butt.
Where Raiden, on the other hand, can't keep track of the one relationship he does have. In addition, he says some pretty cringy lines and overall can be kinda whiny.
And that vampire too, it's like being in a nightmare you can't wake up from.
Raiden progresses through the Big Shell with not much trouble coming from it, until he meets the team that was meant to rescue the president. SEAL Team 10 gets slaughtered by Vamp, with Raiden being his next target, only for him to be rescued by a SEAL going by the name of Iroquois Pliskin. But come on, we all know who this is. It is Snake, so I'm just gonna call him that from now on. Here's when Snake and Raiden get to talking, and Snake questions him about being a member of Foxhound since
Foxhound was disbanded.
Also, Raiden was evidently not briefed on any of the things really going on here, since Snake has to explain to him who the members of Dead Cell are.
With their leader being revealed to be ex-President George Sears, or as we found out last time, Solidus Snake, the third and best clone of Big Boss. By the way, I just love Snake's line to Raiden about legends here.
But he's a legend.
Legends are usually bad news. There's not a lot of difference between heroes and madmen.
I like it because while it might not mean too terribly much within this game, when you play the prequel games, this line's really good since Big Boss after Metal Gear Solid 3 and Portablops was given the status of a legendary soldier, but behind the scenes he turned into a madman with nuclear weapons and multiple Metal Gears that he used to threaten the world. With Solid Snake being a first-hand witness for this since he was trained by whom he thought was one of the greatest soldiers ever, but later saw him for who he truly was. Which in my opinion is why Snake says what he says here.
As Raiden progresses through the Big Shell, he sees SEAL Team 10, well, what's left of them, firing at someone. Or something. You hear the firing sound effects fade in favor of the saxophone melody playing. The camera pans to a black woman with blonde hair, walking closer to the Navy SEALs, but bullets aren't hitting her for some reason. They're literally flying past her, with the bullets taking seemingly physically impossible maneuvers that are anything but straight. The black woman has some suicidal monologue, but the bullets are flying past her. Vamp comes over and picks up an unconscious old man to take him inside. More SEALs come in and fire a grenade round, only for it to be a dud. Fortune then uses her large electric gun and takes out the bridge with the SEALs caught in the blast radius. This scene is your first look at Dead Cell and how much of a threat they really are. In addition to the scene of Vamp slaughtering the SEALs previously, Fortune not only has some mysterious supernatural aura about her, but she also has this giant ass gun that puts Doom Guy's BFG 9000 to shame. Despite being not even half the membership of Foxhound from MGS1, you kind of get why these terrorists were able to take over the Big Shell with little resistance. I mean, you saw what they did to the SEALs, which aren't just your average Joe military. These are the best of the best, and if they can't take down Dead Cell, do you think you could as a one-man army? That's what I really like about Dead Cell in comparison to Foxhound from MGS1. In MGS1, you only see a few of the members do things, and their threat level is only mentioned by other characters, save for a few exceptions. They're pretty much like the 7 Koopalings from Super Mario Bros. 3, except some of them have complicated backstories, but really, all most of them amount to is wait at a certain area, dialogue exchange, battle ensues, you kill them, but before they die, they have some philosophical exchange with Snake. That's all fine and good, but Dead Cell, you're seeing them do these horrible things and get closer to their ultimate goal. You see them kill people mercilessly, making them more than just your dialogue exchanges before the boss fight, which, let's face it, Vulcan Raven was exactly that. It makes these bosses feel intimidating as you have some first-person context on their seemingly limitless potential, and it's even better to see this very idea get expanded upon in the sequels, like with Colonel Vulcan and his sadistic ways in MGS3, but Jay will get to that sometime.
The line we used earlier about this all being,
It's like being in a nightmare you can't wake up from.
is interesting in context since this is the very first time in the series where our characters ever questioned their surroundings and noted how weird it was. I mean, in MGS1, Snake gave the occasional
Who the hell?
However, Raiden is acknowledging how weird Vamp is and how out there Fortune is. Raiden and Snake meet up with Peter Stillman, who's the bombs disposal expert that was sent in. Only problem is that he walks around on a cane and therefore teaches Snake and Raiden how to disarm the bombs. For the most part, this is the part of the story that's the calm before the storm, since during this bomb disposal not too terribly many interesting things happen until Stillman reveals that he actually can walk and lied to everyone since he once failed to defuse a bomb, and as a result somebody died, and to make people not as angry at him, he faked his injury for years and years, which is a really surprising plot twist, as up to this point he's been incredibly likable. And so this really adds some gray to his morality in his final moments, since he went on to disarm one of the final bombs. But it was rigged to kill him by Dead Cell's explosives expert, Fat Man, who was Peter Stillman's apprentice at one point, and by killing Stillman, Fat Man will become the #1 explosives expert in the world. In the meantime, we also get more insight on Raiden and Rose's first meeting, the relevance of which will be revealed later.
After Raiden disarms the last bomb at the bottom of Shell 1, an elevator descends, and guess what? It's Fortune, and because she mistakes Raiden as her father's assailant, giving some vague insight as to her character and why she is the way she is, she's just out there to avenge her father's death, but because Raiden is hiding, she doesn't know that it's not her father's alleged assailant. Raiden contacts Colonel Campbell about how Fat Man is going to blow up the entire shell. Vamp joins Fortune and talks about how Fat Man is going rogue and doing his own thing that will jeopardize their own mission. As they are about to leave, Raiden shoots at Fortune, only for the bullet to sharply turn towards Vamp's head. Raiden leaves, and the scene reveals more of Vamp's supernatural powers. He's seemingly immortal as he awakens despite a bullet to the head. How this is possible isn't really explained that much in the game. He does have a backstory, but really doesn't say anything much about how he's able to do the physically impossible. In addition to the fact that his backstory is explained in an optional codec call.
When he was just a kid, he lost his family to a terrorist bomb that went off in a church they were attending. His body pierced by a crucifix, Vamp was buried under the rubble for 2 days before he was finally rescued. During those 2 days, he survived by feeding on the blood of his family to quench his thirst. That was how he acquired a taste for blood.
So that's why they call him Vamp.
No, Vamp isn't for vampire, it's because he's bisexual.
Thank you, Snake. That was a very important piece of information I really needed to know.
Following that, Raiden faces off against Fat Man, who's pretty eccentric. With his Robotnik-like design, the fact that he runs around on roller skates. And before dying, he also has one last bomb for you to defuse, and after doing that, a cyborg ninja appears.
It doesn't attack and instead asks you to follow it. Despite Raiden constantly asking for its identity, it refuses to identify itself but does tell you the location of the hostages, and even gives you a security card giving you access to higher level doors, as well as a terrorist soldier disguise. With this cyborg ninja's appearance, things are seeming very similar to the previous game, although this cyborg ninja's armor looks very different, missing the central red eye that the cyborg ninja in MGS1 had.
Yeah, despite missing the red eye, the mask's appearance is much more eerie, since it has no face. I mean, imagine being cornered in a dark alley by that guy. This cyborg ninja, as a result, comes off as more mysterious as to what his motives are, making its presence even more unsettling.
At this point in the story, we don't know who this cyborg ninja is. We saw Gray Fox killed in MGS1, so with this cyborg ninja, it makes you think whether it's the same one or if it's an entirely new one with similar or different goals of its own. For now, it's an unlikely ally and a useful asset of information, which comes off as more of an exposition dump if anything, because now they have a nuclear weapon, they just need the access code to it. There's also supposedly a Metal Gear house, and the big shell is just one giant cover-up. I would have preferred if the ninja tells you that information after the hostages, so there's a fair amount of information distribution, because the whole big shell is housing Metal Gear and a nuclear weapon deal could have been more effective as a mid-story plot twist before rescuing the President of the United States. That would raise the stakes immensely because you just got done doing one important objective, but the other very important objective would have became even more of a priority and would have better explained why they want the President in the first place. I'm not saying the cyborg ninja has to meet Raiden again directly, but a mandatory codec call really wouldn't hurt that much.
Anyways, Raiden sneaks in disguised as a terrorist in the area filled with the hostages. He has to make contact with Agent Ames, who's among those hostages. He, like the cyborg ninja, is working for this secret organization called...
No, I was set in by the Lali Lulelo.
And reveals the location of the president. We're also introduced to Dead Cell's leader, going by the name Solid Snake, as I established earlier, as he walks over to converse with Revolver Ocelot. With Raiden listening in on their conversation with the directional microphone, They mention how the deceased fat man is possibly working for someone else, and how they need a password confirmation from the president in 1 hour, and how some girl is close to activating the unit. There's of course the infighting between Olga Gurlukovich and Revolver Ocelot, and of course, Ocelot has another right arm freakout from the sounds of it. There's also a lot of foreshadowing of what's to come, from characters we'll encounter later, to whatever unit they're referring to. I find it very interesting, and all the more intense since Raiden is still deep in enemy-populated areas of the Big Shell, with Raiden believing that Solid Snake died 2 years in the tanker. For all he knew, that could have been Solid Snake himself leading this terrorist group.
Snake couldn't be the only potential traitor. Due to the password requiring the president to give it up on his own free will, it's possible he sold out and is cooperating with these very terrorists, with Ames suggesting he was tired of being a puppet. Oh, and the terrorists the whole time never even demanded a ransom of $1 billion, since the nuclear weapons detonation was the intention the whole time. It would generate an EMMA pulse, wiping out all electronics. Revolver Ocelot walks over to Ames and disguised Raiden, revealing all along he knew Ames was working for the Lali Lule Lo, and when ready to shoot Ames, he has some violent seizure and then just dies. Ocelot then questions disguised Raiden as to which team he's with, only for his cover to be blown when failing to provide an answer, but thanks to the power of nostalgic comebacks in video games and borderline plot conveniences, the cyborg ninja reappears, attempting to slice off Ocelot's arm, thus distracting everyone so Raiden can make his escape. This is very similar to Ocelot's first encounter in MGS1, which could be said to be a rehash, but the characters who previously participated are aware of it and don't let it play out the same way as it did in MGS1. It's almost too meticulously crafted to be a lazy rehash, or Ocelot would be without another arm. Then again, this isn't the first time a government worker died of a heart attack. It's almost like a tired gag at this point, no pun intended.
Like Alec alluded to earlier, Raiden now knows that the terrorists are not threatening a nuclear strike, which goes directly against what Campbell told him in the intro.
What are their demands?
$30 billion.
$30 billion? What makes them think they can get that much?
There was a government-sponsored tour going on at the Big Shell that day.
Hostages, huh?
Unless the demands are met, the terrorists intend to blow the Big Shell out of the water.
And the crude will ignite, turning the Manhattan Harbor into an inferno.
That's not the worst-case scenario. If the chlorides being used to decontaminate the seawater go up with the oil, toxins containing catastrophic levels of dioxins will be released. In other words, the bay's ecosystem will be wiped out, and the sea will turn into a toxic soup for centuries, becoming the worst environmental disaster in history.
That ties into one of the major themes of Metal Gear Solid 2, that being lies. Plenty of examples to come. However, as of now, this goes all the way back to the moment Snake infiltrated the tanker, where we saw our main characters lied to, with them having to deal with the consequences. It's like I said, Otacon lied to Snake about how they got the info.
There's something I have to tell you.
What?
We didn't dig up this info about the new Metal Gear on our own. Not like usual.
How did you find out then?
It was a tip. An anonymous tip.
The whole tanker incident was a setup by Ocelot to frame and kill Snake.
Our boy, he's right on schedule. He'll know soon enough.
And now, for whatever reason, Campbell has been keeping info from us and telling us false truths. But way more info on that to come.
We're running out of time. They will fire a nuke. You know what you need to do before then.
Fire the nuke, but it's nowhere close to the ransom deadline.
Ransom?
$30 billion in cash.
What are you babbling about? The nuclear strike is not a threat. It's been the objective all along.
What about the toxins?
The what?
If the Big Shell blows up, the explosion is expected to produce massive amounts of toxins.
Never heard anything about that.
Raiden makes his way to the president, but encounters the former president, whom, like I said, is calling himself Solid Snake. He looks nothing like him, as now you can see his face a lot better. The player knew that this guy wasn't Solid Snake, and due to Pliskin having David Hayter's same grisly voice, and even looking like the Solid Snake we saw in the Tanker chapter, it's pretty obvious to the player, but not so obvious to Raiden, which starts disconnecting Raiden from being an extension of the player. With this terrorist leader referring to Pliskin as brother, however, does reveal that he is related to Solid, but isn't Liquid. Text reveals he is Solidus Snake. I honestly would have picked a better name like Gas Snake or Plasma Snake, because Solid, Liquid, 4 phases of matter? Whatever. I mean, it still relates to chemistry, with a solidus being the curve in a graph of the temperature and composition of a mixture, below which the substance is entirely solid.
Alec, this is not why I stayed science class.
Sorry. Despite the real Snake unloading bullets and explosives on Solidus, he's wearing a powerful exoskeleton suit, and even being thrown off the bridge didn't stop him thanks to the Harrier, just waiting for someone to fall on it. Very convenient. Snake gives Raiden the Stinger missiles, and a boss battle ensues, which is very similar to the Liquid Snake boss battle on Shadow Moses, with the missiles being used to take down his aircraft, and the only difference is that it's faster, and the battle requires protecting the real Snake's helicopter. Again, it's a rehash element with an intentional difference being Solid Snake's appearance. Just what exactly is Kojima taking the story direction? Why are so many things similar, yet different at the same time?
With Solidus defeated, we saw he took quite a bit of damage to the eye. Worth noting the fact that it's the opposite eye that Big Boss is missing in Metal Gear 2. Before the jet crashes into the water though, Metal Gear Ray from the Tanker chapter is shown catching the jet. Cove pilot Vamp runs out of it, on water. Because the Twin Snakes is the most ridiculous game of all time and cannot dare to carry the Metal Gear name, yet Vamp, really doing the physically impossible of Metal Gear Solid 2, is perfectly fine. Yeah, okay. Metal Gear Ray is seen diving underwater, taking Solidus with him, and this is when Snake and Otacon, who is introduced to Raiden, explain their lies about who they are. They explain that they faked Snake's death by putting Liquid's dead body into the water, and despite him missing an arm, because, well, Ocelot had it, the DNA test results confirm him to be Snake. With that out of the way, Raiden moves on to Shell 2 to track down the location of the current president who is the hostage.
Raiden sneaks his way into the next shell and eavesdrops on an unaware Olga who is talking with Solidus on a communicator about how they discovered Solid Snake is on the shell. Olga, of course, displays her anger and vengeful desire to kill Snake, for she blames Solid Snake for her father's death. Jeez, how many characters in this game lost a father on the tanker incident and blame Snake for it? Anyways, Olga requests Solidus turn on the high voltage floor, to which the control panel to that needs to be destroyed with a remote control missile. By the way, the president is in that very room, so have fun. With that out of the way, Raiden finally sneaks into that room and encounters the president, who believes Raiden to be sent there to kill him. It's a serious scene, although the serious tone is dissolved as soon as Mr. President does the dog test on Raiden.
What are you... What the...
You're a man?
The serious atmosphere is regained in the codec call with him as he reveals that he wants power, and when Raiden's confused given how he's the president of the United States, it turns out that the truth behind America's government, the military, even who becomes the president is told.
It's the patriarchy, I mean the Patriots. The truth is that every law ever made, every politician ever elected, everything, it was all instructed by the Patriots, an organization so secret even the president doesn't know who the 12 members of the Wise Men's Committee are. What he says about when a pawn becomes a queen, even that is just a playing piece. That really resonates with me, just how much power the Patriots truly have. This changes everything we knew the series for. This is the ultimate retcon, but it's not a careless retcon, as everything now makes sense.
The president wanted to help Solidus so he can use Metal Gear as a way to become a member of the Patriots, but he later learned that Solidus wants the Patriots to be destroyed, and with the Patriots' destruction is when the country would descend into pure anarchy. In other words, this organization is the lesser of two evils. On one hand, the country would be free from the Patriots' control, but at what cost? It does make Solidus' intentions much more meaningful, and also makes the player look at themselves just a playing piece and not the player. Speaking of Solidus, the president mentions more about his background. As I said, he was the former president, but he acted on his own against the Patriots' control, resulting in the Shadow Moses incident. The Patriots found out about him telling Ocelot to infiltrate Foxhound to provoke Liquid into wanting to use Rex to hold the world at gunpoint, all the while escaping with Rex's test data and leaving Solid and Liquid to do their thing. We were totally resigned, but apparently that was just a cover-up and they were eventually going to kill him. If it wasn't for Solidus gaining the help of Ocelot and went into hiding, eventually gaining control of Dead Cell and Gorlukovich's mercenary army to put this plan into action. We also learned that Metal Gear Ray has had copies made of it and they're guarding a giant Metal Gear within the big shell known as Arsenal Gear. And the girl known as Emma Emmerich, who's the main programmer for Solidus' project, is still on the big shell, and the president instructs Raiden to find her and upload a virus that would stop Arsenal Gear from going through with its devastating plans.
Before the final check for his vital signs needed in order to activate Arsenal Gear, he wants Raiden to kill him before that happens, but Raiden refuses and oddly, Revolver Ocelot shoots him. The beginning of the game portrayed him as this untrustworthy agent when he killed his partner before taking Metal Gear Ray for himself, but now we know that he may possibly betray Solidus at some point for his own plans. Just what exactly are these plans are still a mystery. I do feel that there is another exposition dump as we go from lol, Mr. President mistaken's Raiden for a woman, not squeeze, to democracy and what we thought of the government was all a stage play. You know, that would have been fine, I love that, but Solidus' origin extended the visually unstimulating codec calls beyond to, when does this end? I mean, the Patriots and Solidus' anti-patriot plans work together, but his origin story could have been told later in the game. It does give reason as to why Solidus has a beef with the Patriots, but again, he could have briefly mentioned it and had it elaborated on later.
But trust us when we say, we haven't even gotten to anything close to the worst of it yet in this game. Although one thing I want to mention about that scene was that the codec call where the president reveals the fact that the Patriots just had an elaborate stage play in the form of the election and that none of it was real since this guy was going to be president no matter what happened, which really had an impact on me on this run of MGS2. Since while obviously there's no overseeing force like the Patriots in our world, or at least I hope there isn't, I'm just going to throw it out there. Given how the most recent American presidential election was for the last several months leading up to it, I can't help but imagine that very same presidential election taking place in the Metal Gear universe being a staged drama pop up in my mind. Not that this really matters, but it's just food for thought. Since most certainly later in the game, parallels between our current life and the life certain characters describe can be drawn. But we'll get to that when we get to that. In the beginning, the game states that the story is completely fictional and any and all similarities to real-life events or figures are coincidental, but still, you get my point. Raiden reports to Snake what just happened, and then we find out what the reason Snake got set up in the tanker chapter for was to begin with. Reason being that the Patriots had wanted Snake to go to Shadow Moses and deal with Liquid and the other members of Foxhound via Foxdie, but after that he was supposed to die, but he survived, and thanks to his heroism in the Outer Heaven Uprising, the Zanzibar Land disturbance, and now the Shadow Moses incident, Snake had become kind of a public icon, so they wanted to get rid of Snake, hence their attempt to kill him off in the tanker episode. They didn't quite succeed at killing him, but they got the photo they needed framing him for the entire thing, making philanthropy to blame for the environmental disaster that took place after Ocelot got away from the destroyed tanker with Metal Gear Ray. All of it was to make an example out of the people who would turn their backs on the Patriots. The same thing happened to Solidus.
With Raiden having the tools he needs, he moves on to search for Emma Emmerich. Problem is, Fat Man's explosives pretty much flooded the place Emma's in. This is going to be a problem since Hal mentions how she's afraid of water due to a traumatic experience with Hal's father. His father drowned in a swimming pool with Emma almost drowning during her childhood. It's rather inconvenient for Raiden as it's like, come on Emma, the fate of the country doesn't have time for your fears. However, Raiden swims through the flooded area and encounters Vamp, just sitting on top of the water. Because he's a vampire! I really don't know how he's doing this. Before finally facing him in battle, he mentioned how there's a new nuclear weapon threat, which is a clean thermonuclear hydrogen bomb that can be activated as soon as Arsenal Gear is activated. So despite the weapon needing the president's vital signs alive in order to be activated, is no longer a problem because there's another one we have to worry about. This is when we really have to stop Arsenal Gear. After an epic showdown with this vampire dude, he is plunged into the oxygen molecule-rich water with no buoyancy, meaning he has no way of swimming upwards, and is now trapped underwater, likely to drown. But knowing he's Vamp, he'll be choking and endless drowning, but never die from it. That is pretty intense.
Raiden enters the room that Emma was being held in and is found inside a locker, kinda like her brother in MGS1, and even pisses herself to boot. She's reluctant to go with Raiden since she suspects he's another member of the terrorist that's holding her captive, but she agrees to go with him, even through the underwater sections, despite that fear proving to be another complication. Emma does mention her feeling towards Hal, whether it be from wearing her decorative glasses in honor of someone she used to know, to her time spent with Hal when their respective parents were together. And it's kind of touching, and unlike the few exposition dumps, this story transitions perfectly after spending so much time swimming underwater. She tells you the emotional details you didn't even know you wanted, and after that, Raiden contacts Colonel, basically saying he has Emma with him.
I've got Emma Emmerich here. We've managed to avoid drowning.
Then the call cuts to Snake and Otacon, and after hearing that story, you look forward to what Otacon and Emma will say to each other after being apart for so long. And Otacon mentions his family's dark history and how Emma should have never got involved in the Metal Gear project. Is he referring to his involvement in the Shadow Moses incident, or is he foreshadowing what we'll know of his father? That's really up to your interpretation. Since Hal's father doesn't just end with, he was Hal's father and drowned in the family swimming pool, his character will get elaborated on heavily in later Metal Gear installments such as Peace Walker and The Phantom Pain, for better or for worse. But this is a very interesting detail, like as if Kojima had the character of Hal's father figured out before even releasing the prequel games, which I will get to at some point to explain this further.
Before crossing yet another water-filled hallway, surprise, surprise, Emma asks about the president when Raiden shows her the worm cluster virus that would disable GW's nerve connections. I don't know why they had to flash back to the president's death with it happening so recently. The cameras could have zoomed in on Raiden's grim-looking face and mutters, "He was killed." And then there would have been a choice of passive or overreaction from Emma, and then cut to the Kodak call of Emma telling him all she knows about the Patriots.
I really do enjoy this bit, since like many other moments in this game, it gets you to think about common knowledge and believing the things everyone tells you.
With the newly created system, they can fully regulate digital information. High-level information can be categorized in stages, given clearance levels, and deleted as necessary, never to be seen by the public. By deleting such information, the Patriots can shape the course of history as they see fit.
Somebody's bound to catch on.
No, the memory capacity, not to mention the lifespan of the average individual, is extremely limited. On the other hand, digital information lasts virtually forever. It doesn't deteriorate.
So?
The alphabet, 26 letters, right? It could have been 30 letters. What if the 4 deleted letters were controlled by a program?
Impossible.
It's not. In fact, something similar is already underway. Do you know how many genes exist in an individual?
About 30 to 40,000?
Right, that's what was announced at the turn of the century, but there's actually 100,000 according to the original theory advanced by the scientific community. Information regarding the remaining 60,000 was suppressed by the Patriots.
No.
Why? How would you know? Do you know what a gene looks like? Did you count them yourself?
To use an analogy, think about it. For such a long time, common knowledge was that there were 9 planets in our solar system, and people just believed that since that was what the top scientists had to say. And yet more research had helped us find out that there were actually 8 planets since Pluto was declared a dwarf planet in 2006, a few years after this game came out. So continuing to research what everyone thinks is common knowledge revealed groundbreaking discoveries. We're coming up on the best part of the story, folks, so bear with us. Raiden and Emma make their way to the bottom of Shell 2, and Raiden, with the help of Snake, needs to defend Emma while she walks across the bridge via sniper rifle. Things go astray when Vamp makes his final appearance and mortally wounds Emma before it being taken down. Snake brings her to Otacon, and Raiden has to make his way there too. Unfortunately, they can't stop the bleeding and Emma's about to die. But the worm cluster is uploaded into the computer, but it stops at 90%, meaning that Snake and Raiden will have to infiltrate Arsenal gear themselves. Before that though, Otacon and Emma share one last heart-to-heart before she dies, and Otacon tells her that the cluster was successful in a similar vein to what Snake did to Naomi in the last game about Grey Fox. This scene is probably the best of the Otacon loses someone he loves scene, since while I like the Stockholm Syndrome angle that Sniper Wolf's death had, it still didn't make for a very emotional relationship. And I'm not even going to start talking about Otacon and Naomi in Metal Gear Solid 4 just yet. Here, I buy the feelings they have since they're related, therefore making this scene far more dramatic. Speaking of dramatic, I freaking love the next scene where Snake asks Otacon to save the hostages while he and Raiden go into Arsenal. Before leaving though,
try to get as many hostages out as you can. It's a short flight to the shore, so don't worry about overloading the Kamov.
Leave it to me.
I repeat, personnel in the upper levels, head for the evacuation area immediately.
I'm counting on you, Otacon.
I just love that part, simply because like I said in my MGS1 review, these two people who on the outside seem like completely different people, given Snake being a war veteran and Otacon being an anime nerd, however, they connect so well since on the inside both of them are just lonely guys with no purpose in life. Now, 4 years after Shadow Moses, the only purpose they need is working together to stop the spread of Metal Gear, and they'll do that till the end of time. Stuff like this is why I find this often convoluted lore so fascinating and worth spending this much time talking about in my videos.
The scene is even more tragic when Otacon heads for the helicopter to take the hostages to safety, and Emma's parrot he's carrying is repeating,
Hal? I miss you.
Implying Emma said that many times with the bird in proximity, and that implies that she didn't hold as much resentment as she let on when talking to him in the codec conversation. After Hal's final monologue about how you can't just wish for a family to happen, the cyborg ninja reappears next to Snake, and it was apparently working with Snake the whole time. Snake reveals he wasn't on Raiden's side the whole time, and the ninja shows its rather familiar face, Olga Gerlukovich. Yes, the same Olga who can be heard about her desire to kill Solid Snake. She strikes down Raiden with her electrically charged katana, and he is now unconscious. This scene is very intense, as now you're just piecing past events together, trying to figure out what Snake is up to. Meanwhile, the big shell collapses as Arsenal gear is activated and ascending to the surface. After seeing Hal confidently fly the helicopter out of there with the rescued hostages on board, the next scene shows a first-person view of bright lights very reminiscent of when Solid Snake was captured in MGS1. In fact, Raiden is being held in a torture chamber exactly like the one in MGS1. Don't worry, there's no carpal tunnel syndrome inducing button mashing sequence like in the last game.
Although something similar happens just once for a few seconds with one of Solidus' Doc Ock arms. He even brings some more insight to Raiden's backstory by calling him Jack the Ripper. Apparently, Raiden was not the VR-trained rookie we thought he was. However, in actuality, Raiden was a young child soldier in the African Civil War, and his kill count was so high that he earned the name Jack the Ripper. Solidus himself was the leader of that child soldier unit, and reveals that he is Raiden's father. Following the war, the Patriots gave Jack a new identity, and he tried to suppress these memories, which is why he was distant from Rose throughout the whole game. Which all comes to a head now at the end, since Rose and Raiden have a talk revealing their true backgrounds. Raiden tells Rose all about his dark and messed up backstory, and I think I'll let him explain it.
There was never a real reason for me to fight, except that someone put a gun in my hand. And that someone was him.
It wasn't your fault.
If I survived the day's fight, I was praised, fed, and had a bed to sleep in. I think I was only 6 when I held my first AK. But I'm not even sure of that.
Jack.
They give you a gun, you ask how many to kill. If you didn't, you were the one they shot instead.
It's okay. No one is blaming you.
We were shown Hollywood action films every day. The kind with macho guys and big guns. They call it image training. They built us from the ground up into killing machines. We were fed once a day. I can still taste the gunpowder they mixed into the food.
Gunpowder? In the food?
The gunpowder had toluene in it, giving it hallucinogenic properties. It kept us drugged, controllable.
Thanks to Olga, who now reveals that Snake is still on Raiden's side despite the scene earlier, he escapes to find Snake, and this is the moment when the game completely breaks itself.
He's completely naked, with many of his abilities stripped from him, no pun intended. While the Colonel just spams codec called nonsense, Raiden as a result comes to the realization that he never actually met Colonel Campbell in real life. The Colonel's voice is all distorted with an unsettling choir in the background, adding to the atmosphere of the current vulnerable situation Raiden is in.
Honestly though, you have played the game for a long time. Don't you have anything else to do with your time?
A lot of the nonsense he speaks are references like turn off the console being a fourth wall breaking reference to what Big Boss Venom Snake orders you to do in the first Metal Gear game, and even the basic orders to infiltrate Outer Heaven with even Metal Gear 1 footage. But then Rose calls, talking about how their first meeting was no coincidence, and that their romance the whole time was mainly artificial. But her feelings for him were not. Raiden feels betrayed while Rose is trying to reconcile with him, but he's not buying it. She concludes the conversation revealing she's pregnant with his child before being abruptly cut off. These series of calls leave me more confused if anything. It was intentionally confusing as the truth is yet to be revealed, but now for all I know, this Rose could be a computer simulation herself. This is when many MGS2 players, even the detractors of this game, say this is when the story gets very interesting, and this is no exaggeration. It's not often the player gets played by the game in this manner, and it's so frustrating for the character, yet you are so surprised you want to uncover more of this truth the game is suddenly presenting.
After that codec call, Snake reappears with his intentions still a mystery, but he at least gives the buck-naked Raiden his gear back. Finally. He also gives him Olga's katana, which totally won't be foreshadowing some spin-off game starring Raiden. Raiden tells Snake the truth about his past in a very great scene with Snake giving Raiden advice about war and killing.
Raiden, we don't carry guns to take people down. We're not here to help some politician either.
You can say that because you're a legend, a hero. I'm Jack the Ripper, a dirty reminder of a terrible mistake. People will remember only the good part, the right part of what you did.
There's no right part in murder. Not ever.
And then telling the aimless Raiden what to do with his life. I really do enjoy this bit a lot. It's not particularly complicated, it's just that for whatever reason, Snake's lines about there not being a right part in murder really speaks out to me every time I play the game. Moving on from there, the game completely breaks itself, with it going from a stealth action game to kind of a hack and slash, with Raiden and Snake blasting and cutting their way through everything in their path with game code crashing through the walls. Which is most certainly not helping Raiden's diminished sense of reality, and not that Snake was helping too terribly much either.
If you run out of ammo, you can have mine.
You got enough?
Absolutely. Infinite ammo.
Which in and of itself is kind of weird since the infinite ammo was given to Snake by Meryl in the good ending of MGS1, and we saw the stealth camo get used by Snake in the Tanker episode. Otacon gets a hold of Snake and Raiden and reveals the truth about Campbell, and that the whole time Campbell was just an AI constructed by the Patriots called GW, and was not the real Campbell, and it was acting up since the worm cluster has come into effect finally. Which of course has Raiden shocked, but for now he has to put a lid on it as he and Snake fight more guards.
After they're defeated, Fortune shows up, finally encountering her father's alleged murderer, and Snake tells Raiden to go on without him as Fortune and him engage in a battle that's not seen by the player. Raiden is now standing in a dark room illuminated by the electronic floor, and he hears the echoey voice of Solidus finally explaining the S3 plan, aka the Solid Snake simulation. In other words, all this game was a recreation to make Raiden much like Solid Snake, hence why many events are the same and the overall Big Shell incident has been paced similarly to the Shadow Moses incident, from the appearance of the cyborg ninja, terrorists taking over an area, and their leader is coincidentally one of the Les Enfants Terribles children. The list goes on to smaller things like a watery entrance into the facility, with Colonel Campbell saying the same lines that Mei Ling did to describe the Soliton radar.
The bright dot in the middle is you, Raiden. The red dots are your enemies, and the blue cone shape represents their field of vision.
Or how about the death of Ames and the President being very similar to Decoy Octopus and the Arms Tech President? These callbacks could easily be a meta statement against rehashed sequels in video games, but I'm glad it was executed in this manner because there was some payoff for making such a good point.
Another thing worth mentioning would be how MGS2, as Alec just said, rehashed elements from MGS1. However, MGS1 borrowed a lot of elements from Metal Gear 2, in the ways that game was paced with a cyborg ninja, a high ND, a stair chase, the works. Then the next Metal Gear game released was the Twin Snakes, so interesting that this formula was used 4 times in a row. Not that it's exactly the same, nor am I saying that it's a problem since each of these games has a reason for doing it, I'm just sort of pointing out something I noticed.
After Solidus' S3 revelation, he disappears and has his Metal Gear Rays attack Raiden. He of course takes them down, but he's exhausted and one of the Rays is about to step on him until Olga reveals herself in her camouflage. I'm not sure why she didn't wear her cyborg ninja suit, since that would have let her be better equipped, and it's not like the game mentioned her disposing of it.
Regardless, she jumps in to push Raiden away, and Solidus revealing that she has to protect him, or the Patriots would kill her hostage child, even though this involves betraying her fellow Russian mercenaries who died at the hands of Raiden.
Solidus uses one of his Doc Ock arms, and he breaks her neck, and as she's killed, he walks over to Raiden taunting him as usual, but the Metal Gears are all malfunctioning as the worm cluster virus is really taking full effect on the GW AI, as if the codec calls before weren't a telltale sign enough.
The Patriots regain control of the Rays, but despite their efforts to kill Solidus, he takes out the remaining Rays and grabs Raiden about to kill him. Fortune surprisingly comes in with a captured Solid Snake. He then questions Fortune as to whether she's going to hijack Arsenal gear for herself, to which he mentions he was going to give it to her anyways. His plan was to get a list of names of the Wise Men's Committee in hope of taking down the Patriots, while Arsenal gear would draw their fire. In other words, Arsenal gear was nothing more than a diversion. But another plot twist! Solidus isn't the only one using people here. He himself was being used by Ocelot since he's working for the Patriots. Solidus was used for the S3 plan due to his relationship with Raiden resembling Snake and Big Boss in Zanzibar Land. I mean, I would say Outer Heaven, but, you know, the Phantom Pain happened. Fortune and Dead Cell were used as stand-ins for the rogue Foxhound group in MGS1, and he also reveals to Fortune his responsibility in sinking the tanker, with Fortune's father being on board, and then the Patriots were also responsible for the infamy of Dead Cell just to provoke their hatred. Ocelot then shoots Fortune as she's charging her gun, and now the bullet impacts her with Ocelot revealing that the reason she can't die is because of some electromagnetic shield that can be turned on and off. He steals Metal Gear Ray for himself, again. The piloted Metal Gear Ray fires at an enraged Solidus with one of the bullets hitting Snake's cuffs, but Fortune of course tries to use one of her telekinetic abilities to stop Ocelot, but as Ocelot said, her luck has run out. But apparently not, as she's somehow able to divert all the missiles from hitting the group before finally dying from the bullet wound. Now this is when the game kinda starts contradicting itself. So Ocelot says Fortune had no power and was all technology and that magic doesn't exist, despite Ocelot working with Psycho Mantis and Vulcan Raven during the Shadow Moses incident, and that and Fortune actually having power makes no sense given the fact that she dodges the missiles, but if she had the powers all along, why couldn't she dodge the bullet from Ocelot? And maybe because she is actually trying to use the power now before she just got used to it being automatic through the tech she had? I really don't know, but the game doesn't give much of a reason to believe my suggestion. Ocelot of course tries to use the Ray's laser attack, but you guessed it, another Liquid Snake right arm freakout. Liquid possesses Ocelot through the arm, and now the three snakes come face to face with Liquid saying,
"There's room for only one snake and one big boss."
Keep that line in mind for MGS3 since I'll be coming back to it there. Beyond that, I really enjoy this scene since Cam Clark as Liquid is just such fun to have on screen, which is probably why he's revived via the ARM plot since they wanted to bring him back since killing him was probably not the greatest of ideas. Liquid Ocelot escapes inside of Ray to destroy the Patriots with Snake giving chase, leaving only Solidus and Raiden as Arsenal gear goes crashing through several blocks of New York City.
With Arsenal gear crashing near the Federal Reserve, Solidus asks Raiden if he knows what day it is, a similar question asked by Rosemary, but only coincidentally, the day is revealed to be April 30th, 2009, the day George Washington took office as the country's first president hundreds of years ago, drawing parallels of George Washington's idea of a free country to his own vision. He also talks about how he wants to pass his knowledge on to the next generation, especially since he and his brothers are unable to reproduce. He wants to be remembered as a hero, someone who freed the people of America from the control of the Patriots, who are controlling what information is passed on. Then, surprise!
Despite GW being destroyed, AI Colonel Campbell calls you and apparently there are more AI like GW. And AI Rosemary joins the conversation as well, and they tell Raiden why they want to control the digitized world of the internet. They don't like the overabundance of junk data like rumors, slander, and basically any other useless information that keeps growing in an unfiltered state.
This scene especially resonates with me because for a game taking place in 2009, written in the late 90s and it's now 2017, a lot of what they say about the internet is so alarmingly true. It's actually pretty scary if you think about it. They're right, we do reward convenient half-truths. We do grow up being told we're all special. A lot of us do get told if we try hard enough, we'll succeed. Yet only certain people who were at the right place at the right time succeed. As Campbell said, this is all rhetoric made to protect everyone's feelings from being hurt. As a result, there's more untested truths. In other words, hypotheses with hardly any scientific basis, but made to appease political correctness. That is so shockingly accurate. As AI Rose said, we all retreat to our own gated communities that just validates our opinion, our own made-up truths because we believe it to be, with everyone being offended by everything in this day and age, regardless of whether you're an SJW offended by something that's deemed politically incorrect, or an anti-SJW offended that media is just only including things to fit political correct ideals.
In other words, they believe human beings, because of these flaws, are unfit to control what happens in our world. And that is why they do the things they do. As Rose put it,
"You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context."
The S3 plan is revealed to be really a method of testing our human reactions to a crisis, by trying to recreate the Shadow Moses incident with entirely different people and still come out the same, to see how far their control over people goes, I guess. This process extends far outside the game itself. The entire marketing scheme of Metal Gear Solid 2 is this point summed up. People have always said since 2001 that Konami and Kojima Productions had lied about the true nature of this game since the marketing featured Solid Snake and not Raiden. But did they really lie? The back of the box states the following. Solid Snake is back in the latest installment of the critically acclaimed series from director Hideo Kojima. top secret weapons technology is being mysteriously transported under cover of an oil tanker to an unknown destination. Armed with an arsenal of new weapons, supplies, and stealth maneuvers, it's up to Snake to infiltrate the transport and keep this deadly weapon of mass destruction from falling into the wrong hands. Where in that paragraph is the lie? That summed up the tanker episode pretty well. I mean, most games only tell you the beginning of the game on the back of the box as is, so MGS2 is only doing the same thing. But in reality, they only told us a half-truth about what this game was going to be like, therefore subtly manipulating our expectations just like the Patriots did to Raiden and everyone else involved in the game, therefore making you feel like Raiden since you're in the same position as he is. The ways the tanker episode and the Big Shell incident treat fans of Metal Gear Solid 1 is completely different. In the tanker, the game fan services Solid Snake to hell and back with numerous playful references to MGS1.
The private sector's not so bad, is it? Privacy guaranteed?
I'm happy as long as no one gives me any more unwanted gifts.
You mean that thing with Naomi?
And I can't say I miss the chattering nanny.
Mei Ling's not so bad. You know how the technical specs of Metal Gear were sold on the black market after Shadow Moses?
All Ocelot's doing.
Exactly. This isn't like Shadow Moses. Reach me if anything happens. We've ID'd the old man.
Who is he?
Sergei Gerlukovich.
Gerlukovich, one of Ocelot's allies. Raven.
Snake, that shadow.
It's him. No doubt about it.
But Raven was, out in Shadow Moses.
I know. Maybe it's the last of his 9 lives. Or maybe his maker decided to give him another chance.
You're not serious, are you?
Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. Either way, we'll find out soon enough.
Snake, watch your step, okay?
That sets up for the Big Shell mission where the game does the exact opposite, by stripping you away from Snake and giving you a story that plays out almost identically to the original, therefore spitting in the faces of the fans they were kissing up to so heavily in the tanker chapter. Now it has all come to a head, revealing that, like Alec said, a commentary on rehashed sequels that video games sometimes follow.
Exactly. This delves into some deep existential territory, and apparently this S3 program wasn't a Solid Snake simulation. Plot twist, now it's selection for societal sanity. Despite Raiden not wanting to fight Solidus just to please the Patriots, Olga's child and Rose would die once Raiden's vital signs show him to be dead, and with Solidus wanting to determine which of them survives, Raiden has no choice but to fight, with Solidus revealing he killed Raiden's parents and how the information of the Patriots that Solidus wants is inside Raiden's nanomachines. This battle is unavoidable. And after a pretty climactic final boss battle, Raiden slices Solidus' spine, and with his suit malfunctioning, Solidus falls down and lands near a statue reaching out for it, while Raiden raises his katana in victory. Even though Solidus was never in a morally good position, I found his presence in the game a lot more meaningful than I did with Liquid Snake, even though he's there to fill in that evil leader role of the S3 plan, but Liquid Snake seemed more intent about proving he's superior to Solid Snake, and while I enjoyed him as a villain, I found Solidus' quest to free people from the Patriots' control a lot more noble, even though how he's going about it is pretty immoral in itself, with letting Fortune have the privilege to kill many people with a nuclear weapon. Maybe Solidus follows the Watchmen graphic novel's philosophy of killing millions to save billions, except in this case it's killing millions to free more millions, and he's even stronger as a villain due to his history with Raiden being his childhood tormentor, doing all these horrible things to him back then. You learn to hate Solidus as Raiden, despite his relatable quest for liberty and justice for all, so when you finally defeat him, you feel a sense of satisfaction like no other. Afterwards, on the streets, Raiden and Snake discuss as who he is in an existential examination sort of way. Snake mentions how there's no such thing as an absolute reality, and what is passed on is based on faith. He also tells Raiden that what he does with his future and what knowledge he passes on is his own choice.
With that being said, he removes the dog tags with the name the player has given to him and disposes of them, because even his future is no longer under your control, which is quite symbolic since you're no longer playing as him. He states that he'll pick his own name and his own life before throwing the dog tags across the street. After that, Snake promises to find Olga's child and reveals that he has the information about the Patriots' identity, telling Raiden he has his own things to do before departing. Raiden reunites with the real Rose, with Raiden now promising to see her for who she truly is, with her hand hovering over her womb, pretty much confirming that she is pregnant. They then talk about things like how this is the first place they met on this day years ago, and extend the idea of passing on ideas to the next generation. Other than how all these people can just walk past two unusually dressed men, and how the Patriots just don't arrange for the cops to capture Snake, because from my understanding he's still a wanted fugitive, this ending for all intents and purposes was good though. It introduced many ideas that can even make the player question their own existence, and what they can do with their free will that we often take for granted. This ending is one of my favorites in gaming history. Snake's line about reality have really spoken out to me, and my personal beliefs have been rethought thanks to this. I won't say much more beyond that though. However, I have used this line in many videos.
They taught me some good things too.
I know. We've inherited freedom from all those who fought for it. We all have the freedom to spread the word, even me.
It's a line that's unbelievably well written, acted, and really inspired me to respect the history that granted the freedom we have now and spread the message of equality. Following that, Snake delivers one last speech after the credits, which has again really impacted me.
Life isn't just about passing on your genes. We can leave behind much more than just DNA. Through speech, music, literature, and movies, what we've seen, heard, felt, anger, joy, and sorrow. These are the things I will pass on. That's what I live for.
In MGS2, the theme of the game was genes and how we aren't tied to our genes, and that we as people can decide our own fates and pass on more than genetics. Logically, Metal Gear Solid 2 is about that. The theme is memes, the thing we can pass on to the next generation that are not genetic. Like stories about our lives, our parents, the movies we liked, the TV shows we watched, and the sports we played. This ending inspired me to want to leave a footprint somewhere in the small world. We do have the responsibility to pass on the torch, but to make sure the next generation knows all the good and all the bad to progress the human race. And when we do leave a footprint, then we'll have something for our great-great-grandchildren to remember us by. Thanks to the digital age, we don't have to have our names, our memories, our good days, and our bad days be forgotten about. However, that's all I'll say about that.
I do feel that the idea of free will and how we can make a better future with our own ideas can be reiterated too many times for my liking. It still doesn't take away from the impact the ending had on me. But that's not over, as Otacon and Snake have a Kodak conversation that answers the biggest question of the game. Who and where are the 12 members of the Wiseman's Committee? Well, one of them contributed to philanthropy. They are in Manhattan, but here's the thing.
They're already dead. All 12 of them.
When did it happen?
Well, about 100 years ago.
What the hell?
Was that list they uncovered all a hoax, or is there something else going on bigger than even Snake and Otacon imagine? That is a good way to set up a sequel, and despite the next game not being a chronological sequel, it will delve into this matter.
So with that said, we still aren't done with the story just yet. Overall, the plot is amazing at breaking the fourth wall and acknowledging the player's role in it all the while handling it far more gracefully than a game like Metal Gear Solid 5. I love Snake in this game since as a mentor he is incredibly likable and endearing despite all the lies.
Not happy about that? Get over it.
But the wisdom he does give Raiden, as I said, applies very heavily to our own real lives, and that is why I think this might be my favorite appearance of Solid Snake in the whole series. Metal Gear 2 will be my second favorite, and I also really enjoyed him in Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 4, and I guess Metal Gear 1 by association. But point is just that this is a Snake at his peak abilities, and we watch him do his amazing feats from someone else's eyes. Raiden's story itself is incredibly engaging as a man who's been forced into a situation far outside of his comfort zone, and we see his reality gradually come crashing down around him. Alec, what do you make of the hatred that Raiden gets, as well as your thoughts on Rose as the love interest and the drama that comes from it?
Well, Jay, I understand why some would not care for Raiden, but from my observations, he's basically just a younger version of Solid Snake, minus the cigarettes and grizzly voice. Okay, that's not entirely true. He's his own character, but he does have Snake's habit of repeating information that was told to him in every codec call, which, like Snake, does get a little bit annoying after a while. but Raiden's role in this story is simply fantastic. I'm glad we got to play as him, as it feels like a new experience, despite many events purposefully repeating themselves, and his relationship with Rosemary, I wouldn't say it's the most well done romance in video games or even media in general, but it does work in giving Raiden some motivation to keep pushing forward if he ever wants to see her again. And with Raiden slowly revealing his past and her reaction to it, you feel genuinely bad for not just her, but also Raiden. You don't want this relationship to fail despite this massive obstacle showing up in an already tense life or death mission. I know some people don't like her inclusion, but I like how the hero of the story has an actual romantic relationship. As flawed as it is, it's an improvement over the past 3 games where Solid Snake just had the James Bond type love interests like Diane, Holly, and Meryl. That's about it. They're just love interests. As in Snake at the end of course forgets about her as he metaphorically rides off into the sunset because he's a lone wolf cowboy. Which is fine for his character since, like Jay said, his friendship with Otacon is plenty good enough emotion to come from that character since we haven't seen him actually care about anyone before other than Gray Fox and the already mentioned Girl of the Week. But Raiden, it really is a fresh start for the series. He's in a serious relationship with Rosemary, and despite the mission being a priority, she's still on his mind. So I like Rosemary's role in the game. Sue me. And Raiden himself, he develops more as a character in the one game than Solid Snake did in the previous 3 games. From dealing with his inner demons of the past that he once buried, to confronting his childhood tormentor, to even letting himself free of the control of others. In the beginning of the Shell incident, he starts out as a whiny, inexperienced youngster who everyone is bound to hate as he's so overconfident. But as he realizes what's going on in the Big Shell, he progressively regains the experience he once buried, learning he can't run from the past forever, and at the end of the game, he's where you want him to be and then some.
I love the AI kernel twist, since on the first playthrough, it's really hard to see coming. Since if you play Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 back to back, you can tell there's a difference between the two.
The nuclear weapons disposal facility on Shadow Moses Island in Alaska's Fox Archipelago was attacked and captured by next-generation special forces. Unless the demands are met, the terrorists intend to blow the Big Shell out of the water.
The kernel here just sounds more robotic. However, it sounds real enough for you to not think too much of it on the first run, which shows that Paul Eating has some incredible range. The scene where Raiden talks about Snake and Campbell in a book he read once about Shadow Moses has so many layers to it.
Colonel, you and Snake used to be on the same side. I don't understand. I read about you and Snake in the darkness of Shadow Moses.
I don't give a damn what that piece of trash said. Do you get me?
Since after I first heard it, I was shocked given how the last game ended.
Yeah, but if you ask me, there's no happiness to be gained in death. No peace either. I'm gonna leave here alive.
Good. I want that too.
However, now in the second playthrough, you know that this is not Campbell, and now you know why he said that about the book. The reason being that the book falls in line with his belief as an AI that humans produce worthless garbage, and that's an example of it. So with that said, we really only have one topic left about the story itself. Many people have developed and subscribed to a theory that when MGS2 came out, the story was all meant to be a VR simulation and that none of it actually happened, which would make the story even more meta. However, the obvious counter-argument being how Metal Gear Solid 4 canonized the events of the tanker incident and the Big Shell incident. The main argument against that being how, starting with MGS2, every main Metal Gear game released was always what Kojima had said would be his last one, hence the moral of passing on the torch. And that's why in MGS4, Snake's character is essentially meant to be Kojima as a Metal Gear developer. But that's besides the point. MGS4 was never meant to exist when MGS2 was made, so that's why it gets dismissed in the VR theory. People believe that since numerous times we're told that Snake being there was
because they were never a part of the simulation. They're an unknown factor.
Which falls in line with what Ocelot was saying about the S3 plan.
Except for the appearance of the real Solid Snake. I wonder now, who sent for you?
Snake, it was I that leaked information about Arsenal to your partner and got you out here. What?
Which is weird, since if Snake wasn't supposed to be there, then that begs the question of how Raiden was supposed to get into the Big Shell without Snake already having blown an entrance inside for himself. In the tanker episode, the game over screen is the same as in MGS1 with the words game over.
Stop kidding around.
However, in MGS VR missions, the game over screen of the words mission failed on them, and the big shell does the same thing with a bunch of stats about your death.
Who's that?
Raiden, respond! Raiden!
Which I'll say is pretty convincing. However, I completely disagree that the tanker episode is meant to be Raiden's VR experience of it. The reason why people say it is because at the beginning of the game, you're allowed to choose if you're playing both chapters or just the tanker or just the big shell. If you do both, Raiden says this.
You are now designated Raiden. Alright, Raiden. You've already covered infiltration and VR training.
I've completed 300 missions in VR. I feel like some kind of legendary mercenary.
Okay, we'll skip that part.
And if you don't, this happens.
You are now designated Raiden. This will be your first sneaking mission. The arms will naturally have to be procured on site.
However, if that was the case, wouldn't Raiden see these events unfold how the Patriots played it off as? Since why would he see Ocelot kill Lukovich and steal Metal Gear Ray, in addition to seeing Solid Snake try to stop him, since that's not how the public was told these events took place, as I already stated. When Raiden talks about doing it in VR, we're shown a different tanker than the one we played, which implies that the one we played was the real deal version of what happened on that day in 2007. More credence to the VR theory being how Arsenal gear shows game code crashing through the walls with you in the same room as VR missions when you fight Ray. Again, all convincing stuff, but I'm still not buying that in and of itself the story is trying to say that these events aren't happening. I think Arsenal gear was just meant to amplify Raiden's diminished sense of reality and the tense atmosphere it has going with it through the AI Campbell going crazy. That's just my opinion, but I also just don't really believe it since Metal Gear for one has always had fourth wall breaking elements. Like, was MGS1 a VR simulation because Psycho Mantis read the memory card? Was Metal Gear 1 VR because Big Boss ordered you to turn the console off? Overall, I feel like the theory kind of undermines the character development that not just Raiden, but also Snake and Otacon went through. I think it's a fun theory, but I'm just not convinced that was the intention behind Metal Gear Solid 2. I also get that I'm kind of skimming over many of the details, but I covered most of the big points I wanted to mention. Alec, what's your take on the VR theory? Any facts I didn't cover you'd want to?
It's an interesting theory, but I think you've covered everything as to why it doesn't really hold a lot of water. It does have some merit, and I recommend giving it a read, link in the description below. However, what if Metal Gear Solid 3 was all a VR training exercise where Solid Snake is in the role of Big Boss?
First I'm hearing about it. I guess I'll have to talk about it then, though. That's the story of MGS2 fully covered, and with that said, given the fact that we've been talking about it for the last hour, I'd say now is a good time to move on. I said this earlier when we were talking about the tanker episode, but I'll say it in more detail now. Metal Gear Solid 2 on the PS2 runs at a 480i resolution, which kind of hurts the graphics a bit, but the amount of detail put into the world with some truly stunning visual effects for 2001 is absolutely incredible. However, the game also runs at an incredibly smooth 60 frames per second, which is a rarity in the Metal Gear series. Not including the HD collection, MGS2, the Twin Snakes, and MGS5 are the only games in the Metal Gear series that run at 60 frames per second when they were originally released. If I'm wrong about that, be sure to correct me, but from my knowledge, MGS1 and 3 were 30, and MGS4 was really inconsistent with its frame rate, and the PSP games were 20. The big shell is incredibly shiny and new feeling, which might be disappointing for anyone who loved the dark and dingy look of Shadow Moses. However, I think the fact that the big shell was recently designed to disguise the building of Arsenal gear makes the shiny finish work with the story, and that's why the Twin Snakes graphical style doesn't work well with Shadow Moses. MGS2 is also certainly the starting point of video games consistently having absolutely great voice acting. All the returning actors like Cam Clarke as Liquid, Patrick Zimmerman as Ocelot, and Christopher Randolph as Otacon, and most importantly David Hayter as Solid Snake are incredibly phenomenal and have really started to know how to deliver these lines, the voices starting to sound more like they do in the rest of the series.
New additions to the cast, including Quentin Flynn as Raiden, are also great, since while people may find them unlikable, I find him incredibly endearing as all of the odds are stacked against him. John Saigon as Solidus is also incredibly convincing as the main antagonist, since he really sells the character's ambitions to restore the US back to its former ideals, and overall sounds more threatening than Liquid did in the first game. Beyond that, numerous voice actors from the cartoon world have found themselves a part of the cast, such as Phil Lamar and Jennifer Hale, and they are just as skilled as they have been in their other works.
Popular film composer Harry Gregson Williams was contacted to do the soundtrack for Sons of Liberty, and he knocked it out of the park, starting with the orchestral rendition of the Metal Gear theme. The actual tracks in the game have the same eerie atmosphere that I loved in the first game. Some of them feel incredibly cinematic. And most importantly, I have to highlight the sound design, how it impacts the atmosphere. Take getting caught in the tanker episode, for example. This game introduces several states in the alert mode, and so when you get caught for the first time, you still have a chance to escape. If you fail to do that, the alert status begins, and you have to fight for your life or hide. And the most tense of all is when you have successfully hidden, but they're still on the hunt for you in the evasion state. The music just enhances the atmosphere by complementing the things I just described when these states are going on. Game music just doesn't get enough credit for the kind of atmosphere it can build, and that's why I always do the music sections in my videos, because imagine the alert status with no sound effects or music. This means that now, after over an hour, we have finally reached the gameplay.
Now, despite not having as much to say about the gameplay as we did the story, let me tell you, it succeeds where most story-heavy games utterly fail in. The gameplay works so well, it actually ties into the narrative, where the two coexist, unlike Uncharted 4, where you can just kill thousands of people, yet Nathan objects to his brother attempting to kill one person in the cutscenes.
No.
Rafe, this guy's on edge.
Oh, don't worry about him, Nadine. These guys don't kill anyone in cold blood. It's just not their style.
What'd you do to piss him off?
It's kind of a long story.
Or how Sullivan can take many bullets in the gameplay, but when he just takes one bullet during the cutscene, it's all of a sudden a huge deal. There's an obvious disconnect between the gameplay and story in that game, also known as ludonarrative dissonance. Metal Gear Solid 2, however, succeeds in this because the cutscenes put the gameplay first and its own story second. Like how you're rescuing the hostages, you use your mic to listen in on what Solidus, Ocelot, and Alger are talking about. But you don't even have to do that at all, as you can just move your microphone away from them and just wait for the next cutscene to play, missing out on foreshadowed details of what's to come. But it is your option if you choose to do so. I wish there was more instances of interactive storytelling in games nowadays, as sometimes playing a newer game can feel like a 5-hour movie and forgets that it's a video game, a game about challenges, not just watching cutscenes. I'm not saying it's inherently bad, but I will give credit where credit is due, and if the story is also a game at the same time, it's more spectacular than just watching the story play itself out.
With that said, if you played MGS1, then you shouldn't have much of a problem getting into MGS2. The game is an expansion of the gameplay that preceded it as opposed to a full-on overhaul, which is fine since it gives the devs a chance to perfect the style they've been building up since 1987. Snake's movement has been taken from the last game with numerous new additions to make this game play better. New additions to the gameplay including the fact that Snake can hop over ledges to make a quick escape from enemies. Also, it's worth mentioning that Snake and Raiden play exactly the same, the only difference being how they do certain commands differently. Like how Snake just jumps over the ledge casually, and how Raiden does a show-offy backflip over the railing. In the MGS1 review, I didn't spend too much time talking about the Twin Snakes gameplay in detail because of how I felt it would be more applicable in this review than in that one. When hanging on rails, you have an energy meter that when it depletes, you fall to your death. To increase said meter, you have to do 100 pull-ups. And it goes to 3 levels if I'm not mistaken. As the Twin Snakes has taught me though, another way would be to let go of a ledge and grab onto another ledge on the way down a few more times to increase their levels quickly. Another minor mechanic would be how Snake and Ride can peek over walls to see what's coming, which I personally didn't use too terribly many times, but it is there, come in handy when playing on a higher difficulty when there's no radar and the guards are smarter. Snake can do a dodge roll attack for quick getaways, or just picking up the pace, but personally I like using it to attack enemies that catch me. Raiden does a cartwheel that's equally useful, although another thing it can do is get you across gaps. Very situational, but still useful at the same time.
The last new control mechanic is swimming for that underwater section, which many have complained about, but Jay and I thought it was fine. Nothing great, but it was fine. You swim at a moderate human-like speed, you can ascend and you can descend in the water, and if you want to go faster, just press the circle button. You can also regain oxygen in specific not so hard to reach areas, and that's only for when you have Emma accompanying you, which is a way to increase the difficulty naturally, so for all intents and purposes, they work pretty well for swimming sections. If there's a way they could be better, please let us know, but I feel like they get such a bad reputation because even though they play much differently than the rest of the stealth game, they're rather unintrusive and if anything just adds to the immersion of being a secret agent deep within enemy territory, with this being the result of an unforeseen variable in the mission.
The mother of all new mechanics is the first-person aiming, which makes its debut in the Metal Gear series. It really opens up options for game design like shooting out lights or shooting out pipes and such. It controls really well, and because of that you don't ever need to be on the same level as the enemy and still defeat them from a distance, which definitely is an improvement over the original game's overhead blind aiming system. With this ability comes another great addition, holding up guards. I don't know why, but I just find this to be so incredibly satisfying that it's not even funny.
Freeze! Move!
Especially in combination with the new, more well-animated and versatile 2-punch kick combo.
Freeze!
When holding guards up, you can collect dog tags, which collecting certain amounts can grant you rewards and repeat playthroughs that are similar to what the stealth camo and the infinite ammo did in the original MGS. However, personally, I never really cared about this side quest, but if you do, be my guest.
The Solidus radar is back and worked just as well as it did in the first game, but because of your new abilities like peeking around corners and even first-person aiming making stealth and progression a lot easier than it was in the predecessor, while you do have this radar with you in the Tanker chapter, it's understandable how you can't use this radar in sections of the until you unlock the strut layout with the nodes. They aren't too hard to find, and it's not like you're blindly running into enemies from the overhaul perspective because, again, you have the first-person aiming, but some have noted how dumb the nodes mechanic was. I'm honestly indifferent to it because of how easy the computer terminals are to find, and it makes stealth even more important to use. But the enemy AI is more intelligent than they were in the predecessor to compensate for the new stealth abilities and the Solidus radar, as they tend to use squad tactics, and when you're hiding, they adapt to your presence and even check things like bathroom stalls or lockers to see if the intruder is hiding there. Sometimes more than one are accompanying the enemy, making a stealthy approach even more essential in this game, and I warn you, they get more intelligent as you select a higher difficulty for this game.
One of my favorite things is how when getting caught, it doesn't lead to an instant alert phase like the last 3 games. Getting caught means that, like I explained in the sound design bit, that you have a few seconds to stop the guard from calling in your location. You can shoot out his radio while holding him up, or when he's about to make the call, or beat him up, or whatever you wish. The alert phase is basically the same thing as the last game, though. Enemies rush in, albeit in squads, like Alec said earlier, to wreck your shit up. The evasion state and the caution state are new. During the evasion period, you have to stay well hidden, since the guard team is looking for you actively. And when that ends, the lengthy caution period begins, and that means you have to be alert since guards are still looking for you, but not directly, just patrolling more intensely to catch you in action.
So how you approach these situations are a matter of outsmarting the enemy, as you can't just shoot a 100 decibel gun multiple times and just expect the enemy to forget you ever showed up and made bloody carcasses out of their squad mates. The silencer is back, which you can apply to your normal gun to shoot the enemy dead and hide their bodies in lockers or behind set pieces so their fellow patrol members don't find them. My favorite introduction, however, are the non-lethal weapons. For one, in the weapon items menu, the non-lethal ones are blue and the lethal ones ones are red. Very appropriate, if I do say so myself. The tranquilizer gun would just put enemies to sleep, so in case you don't want to leave a bloody trail from the enemy's body, you can just put them to sleep, and if they're found, they don't remember being knocked out by you, and their squad mates would just accuse them of being lazy and hilariously kick them awake. Sure hope they don't get reprimanded by their boss. You know what? They're Russian terrorists, who gives a fuck? This further enhances the stealth approach, as it's not about staying away from the enemy sights the least, but also about making sure they don't know you're here, so they can't report your presence to others, which is a much bigger deal on the harder difficulty levels.
That serves as a good segue into the items of MGS2. In MGS2 we have the usual staples for the items roster, such as the cardboard box, rations, and cigarettes, all with the same pros and cons as before, so nothing too terribly much in the way of new things to say on those. However, we now have new ones that generally only get used once or twice, like the directional microphone used to find aims and spy on conversations, or the disguise used to sneak into the Shell 1 core. A new mechanic here is how when being shot you're bleeding. To reduce the bleeding, you can put a band-aid on, and that solves the issue. Or if you think you can manage it, you can squat down behind cover, and this will also heal you. Another thing worth mentioning is that this is the final time that card keys make their appearance, and thank God they have been finally done right. Like I said last time, card keys are and have always been a crutch to make sure you couldn't go to places the game didn't want you to be in yet. So now, not only do we not need to individually swap through them, we don't have any quick fixes like the color cards, nor do we have to keep equipping them over and over again. They stack, and when getting to a door, it just automatically opens, which is an unbelievable blessing. Now that they finally have that down, I'm glad they got rid of it in the next game. Raiden also gets a huge arsenal of weapons, which marks the beginning of the Metal Gear series overly stocking you with weapons. I mean, we've got multiple assault rifles, a few handguns, and grenade launchers, grenades, sniper rifles, mines, and the list goes on. I don't think the variety is too bad in this game, unlike MGS4. And I like how we still don't have to waste time in menus swapping through things. It's all carried at once. Raiden's main new weapon is the katana blade, however I do think it can be satisfying at times, but for the most part I'm getting my ass kicked using it since a sword isn't the best thing to bring to a gunfight. However, it is cool how we can choose between a lethal and non-lethal version and swap on the fly. Since this game was in an era before motion controls, the devs felt the best way to handle the accuracy of swinging a sword was via the right analog stick. Since it was free, because this game didn't have a free camera, which is what more and more games were starting to have this generation. I think a free camera could have helped the game, since I did get caught by an unforeseen guard every now and again when the radar was down, but this wasn't too terrible to get used to. Also, the backtracking issue has also been fixed. In Sons of Liberty, on your first playthrough, you're probably going to be doing more backtracking in this game than you ever have in the series, since the game never tells you ahead of time that you need a sniper rifle until you make it to the point where you need one, and then you have to go all the way back to the armory. But on a second playthrough, this can be accounted for and dealt with accordingly. So in other words, there's no forced backtracking like going back for Ellen in Metal Gear 1, going for the Palkia in MGS, and don't even get me started on the Card 8 and Card 9 disaster from Metal Gear 2. That game had backtracking the absolute worst.
In the original MGS, Jay mentioned how he thought the game had poor difficulty balancing since the health bar gradually getting larger. Like the MSX games left you, ill-equipped for the tough challenges at the beginning of the game. In MGS2, despite the occasional instances of poor camera angles, the health bar being at max for the entire game is a huge improvement in the balancing of the game. Beyond that, the game doesn't top-load you with challenges that never appear again. The elevation of the difficulty also scales with the story. The Tanker chapter takes place in 2007, like we established, as Snake looked in awe at the cipher taking his photo. Here in the Big Shell, 2 years later in 2009, these ciphers are used all over in the game as a security measure. A major source of contention in MGS2 is the section towards the end where Raiden must escort Emma to Snake and Otacon by hand. And when I say contention, I mean people really hate that part of the game. As I touched upon when talking about the water sections, I didn't mind it that much, although I wouldn't want an entire game made out of it. Emma does feel like overly vulnerable baggage that's slowing your pace down to a crawl, but it doesn't take too long to escort her to where she needs to be. If anything, it only enhances how the gameplay ties into the story, for better or worse, especially when after doing all that escorting and even sniping all the enemies down on the bottom of the shell too, only to have her stabbed by Vamp as your reward. You really feel so bad for her, but that's just part of life. Even if you do all in your power to change things, people die. You can't change that, and that really hits you hard.
The number of boss fights has been reduced greatly from MGS1. However, with that said, the bosses have been greatly improved. The battle with Olga is a tutorial for first-person aiming and interacting with your environment. The battle with Ocelot tried a similar thing, but it didn't work out as well since that boss sucked. But here, I love the Olga battle. If you hide and crawl somewhere else, she'll keep shooting at your last position, and halfway through she'll hide behind cover, and you'll have a hard time hitting her. In addition to her blinding you with the lights. On a repeat playthrough, you can shoot the cover away and shoot the lights out ahead of time, so she can't do that. That's the kind of subtlety and nuance that makes a boss battle great. The boss with Fat Man is going for the same kind of thing as Vulcan Raven, however we don't have as many items here as we did there, so it kind of falls flat in that regard in addition to the repetitive bomb disposal gameplay. The Harrier jet's pretty good and is probably the best flying machine battle the series has seen so far, but it drags out for a bit too long since the missiles do too little damage for my liking. Vamp is probably my favorite boss in the game since landing the best hits on his weak spots and seeing that health bar go down in such huge increments was always satisfying. In addition to that, he has a wide variety of attacks and phases, like going underwater or up on top of the rails. The set piece of the Army of Rays is questionable. I think it's kinda cool given how many there are, but blindsides are possible, and it's a little stupid how Raiden could beat an army of Rays, and yet for Snake it was always a big deal to beat one Metal Gear in the last 3 games. I also really enjoyed the boss with Solidus since it put your sword skills to the test one last time before the curtain closes.
Beyond that, after the game is done, we have some other things to talk about. First being the secret theater where you can choose certain characters to be in some of the cutscenes, like Snake's PS1 model killing Marrow in the end as opposed to Raiden killing Solidus, or Raiden infiltrating the tanker with Cyborg Olga in the chopper and not Ocelot. It's a good bit of visual comedy if you ask me. The Substance version added in some other content to play after the game is over, such as new VR missions and regular missions to practice certain skills like sword swings, first-person aiming, holding up guards, disposing bombs, and these are alright, I guess. I mean, the VR missions are good for practicing the skills you need to use in the game. However, the game already gives you an active tutorial as is. These missions are ones I never really bothered with, to be honest. Given the reaction to Raiden the first time around, the devs added a new mode to the game called the Snake Tales, where we see Solid Snake progress through the Big Shell, which could have been amazing seeing the story from Snake's perspective, like the Harrier jet fight, but your air support with a limited time, or following Solidus' men when tricking Raiden to be captured by them. However, they botched it up really badly.
These are a novel concept, however there's no voice acting and the stories are non-canon. That would have been fine, but the problem is the design itself. These sections for whatever reason do not have the Soliton radar, which makes the camera issue here a hell of a lot worse than it would have been if they had the damn radar. So you'll get caught over and over and over again. So expect to see this multiple times. The AR sensor comes in handy, but the problem is that it doesn't enhance my spatial awareness, so I'll still get caught a countless amount of times. It's worth mentioning that the PlayStation Vita version of Sons of Liberty kind of makes the AR sensor a little better by flashing more and more the closer you are to an enemy. But if we're on the subject of the PS Vita version, I just want to ask, why is MGS1 not in the compilation? It contains Metal Gear 1 and 2, in addition to Sons of Liberty and Snake Eater, but MGS1 is the glue that holds all those games together, so I don't know why it wasn't included. I mean, you can download it, but that costs extra, unless you get the Legacy Collection.
The plots themselves are really dumb in Snake Tales, especially the one in the tanker. Campbell a Snake as he boards the ship, and it turns out that Meryl works for Gorlukovich because her father betrayed this guy who did a thing and worked with Campbell, who was her real father, and you know, this sounds stupid just saying it out loud. Think highly that it's not canon. Ruined forever.
The very last thing to mention would be the digital comic release for the PSP. Again, it looks okay and replicated the cutscenes from the PSP games. However, the plot itself really isn't as strong in comic book form, since many of the themes had to be dropped, like the themes about reality versus fiction. I do like how we get to see what Snake was doing during Raiden's rescue of the president, which was fighting Vamp, which explains why Vamp just sort of left the plot for a bit in the main game. However, biggest problems being how Raiden does not beat Solidus in the end. Instead, he gets beaten in like 2 seconds, only for Snake to have to pick up the slack. And the voice acting is also really bad. I mean, seriously, it really is not good. With Snake sounding like old Snake, and Raiden sounding like Cyborg Raiden from MGS2, which, trust me, I'll be complaining about, so get ready for that.
Oh no, I forgot. Olga's child, what do we...
Don't worry, I'll find her. Count on it. As long as you keep yourself alive, she's safe.
Snake, what about Olga's child?
Don't worry, I'll find him. Count on it. As long as you keep yourself alive, he's safe.
The art style of these motion comics also leaves a lot to be desired. There's just way too many pencil markings on these mud puddles we call faces, and I get it's supposed to be stylistic, but watch the Portable Ops and Peace Walker comic cutscenes, and then watch this and tell me it's alright. You'll see the problems with the art style, and with Portable Ops coming out roughly the same time as these digital comics, there isn't much of an excuse and negatively affects the presentation. Let's be honest, do you honestly want to look at this for 3 hours? I didn't think so. And like Jay said in his last video, there's really no point in watching this comic after playing the game. It's supposed to be meant for the fans, but then again, the fans probably played this game 5 years ago. If they were going to make a comic, they should have made it about philanthropy before the tanker incident. Heck, why not make a Road to the Tanker Incident comic? That would have been really cool and fans would have ate it all up. Same with the MGS2 comic. They could have made a comic about the Zanzibar land disturbance after Metal Gear 2. Like maybe about the government agents finding a mortally wounded Grey Fox in the burned body of Big Boss, and cuts to how Snake went into retirement in Alaska.
However, with that all said and done, that covers our full thoughts on Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, and its legacy. Metal Gear Solid 2 has been quite the divisive game ever since 2001. To this day, there are people who still are upset about Raiden's inclusion, people who still don't like its themes being a departure from the first game so much. Metal Gear Solid 2 was a game that was severely misunderstood when it was first released. Since the later games like Snake Eater mocked this game, and Guns of the Patriots being a game that tried to undo the things this game did, thankfully the genius of Metal Gear Solid 2 got the delayed appreciation that it deserved for its subtlety and nuance. Something like the Venom Snake twist will never get that, because it didn't have either of those elements. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. It would be an overstatement to say that Sons of Liberty is one of the best games of all time, because that's just plainly not the case. It's extremely flawed in many regards, like the fact that the endgame is bogged down by visually unstimulating cutscenes, or codec calls, or the camera, and the list goes on. However, the game is still a postmodern achievement through its themes and the things it did for the gaming industry. If you look at many of my favorite games of all time, a common theme with them is that any game that gives me an emotional response is one of my favorites. Whether it be the feeling of triumph as I defeat Sigma when it would have been an impossible feat at the beginning, or making me, no lie, cry every time I see certain cutscenes of The Last of Us, or in Slide 2 where I see my favorite characters grow and change, or make me feel inspired, and that's the impact that Sons of Liberty has had on me every playthrough. So in other words, Metal Gear Solid 2, after the 4 playthroughs I've done of it, is one of my favorite games of all time because of how mechanically deep it is, leading me to learn something new about it every playthrough, and a story that keeps me thinking long after shutting off the console.
I do feel that despite the initial reaction, this amazing game will find its audience, and it's already finding its audience as some people are coming forward about how it's actually quite an amazing game. Sometimes the general opinion changes over time, like how The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess is getting more appreciation as of lately. Maybe there are more fans like us out there that see what we see, and then some. Regardless, I am glad this game was successful upon launch, and is still successful with re-releases for future generations to experience for themselves. The game is honestly one of my favorite games of all time for its various themes and well-executed stealth mechanics, so much so that I don't know whether this or Metal Gear Solid 3 is my favorite in the series. While its story occasionally has exposition dumps and there are several instances of backtracking on the first playthrough, I can't recommend this game enough, especially if you're collecting for the PlayStation 2. Not only does this game hold up as an early 6th generation game, it continues to impress me that an early PlayStation 2 game can pull off this much. This is a level of quality that most PS2 games can only dream of achieving. I don't want to sound like a fanboy, but I genuinely believe that this game is that well made.
I think our thoughts on MGS2 are certainly covered. So with that said, where can they find you?
They can find me on the SideQuest Gamer channel, where I mainly review video games and occasionally do editorials and other things. Thank you so much for having me on this special episode.
So the next Metal Gear game is going to be Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. However, it won't be for a while, so thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.